Welcome, everybody, to this webinar. We'll just give everyone a few moments to join, and then we'll do an acknowledgement of country. Okay, today I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of all the lands on which we live today and pay my respects to their elders past and present. We'll just do some housekeeping as well before we actually start the presentation today. You can have your video on or off, and the host has muted all attendees. When we have questions at the end of the presentation, this setting will be removed. If you have questions during the presentation, please use the chat to enter them. You will have the chance to ask them yourself at the end of the presentation. Please wait until we open up the question session. If you want to speak, you will then need to raise your hand so that we can be fair to everyone. Once you have asked your question, make sure you lower your hand by clicking on the hand symbol again. And during that process, we'll go through the chat and everyone will have a chance to actually ask their own questions, and I'll facilitate that. Our presenters today are located in the US, and of course, with the internet, there can always be times when the reception may become poor. So, if you are hard of hearing or want to make sure that you don't miss anything today, you can also add the closed captions to the screen. To do this, you just click on the CC icon at the bottom of your screen and choose your setting. This will allow you to see the captions. If you need the writing on the captions to be larger, click on the subtitle settings where you can increase or decrease the font size. When the closed captions appear on your screen, you can drag the captions box to a location on the screen that works for you. Now, Be Natural Beekeepers Varroa Warriors, as you know, we like to explore different techniques and management practices. We have a diverse group of people in B&B Varroa Warriors, which makes for a richer discussion. We provide a safe space to learn and discuss different approaches to beekeeping so that we can make informed decisions on how we care for our bees. Now I would like to introduce Susan and Jacqueline. So our guests are Susan Chernak and Jacqueline Freeman. Susan's hives are the focus of her spiritual practice, the apiary as temple, teacher, divine inspiration, and meditation corner. She continues to study the science and the mystery of beekeeping and believes that what is truly good for honeybees is equally good for human beings. Jacqueline moved onto her biodynamic farm in Washington in 2001, and she got her first hives soon after. She attended conventional bee school and immediately knew that there must be a different way to care for bees that is more respectful and more compassionate. Their book, What Bees Want, gives a beautiful insight into the world of the bee and how we can care for the bees in a way which is bee-centric and puts the bee first. They will talk to us today about how you can adjust your beekeeping practices to support struggling honeybee populations. As Susan and Jacqueline say, you just watch the bees and they'll show you the way. So please welcome Susan and Jacqueline. And I'll hand it over now to Jacqueline to start the presentation. Thank you.
Can you go to the next slide? Julie, can you go to the next slide?
Hi, my it seems to have frozen, so I'll just come out and go in again.
And Rachel, you've got your hand raised. We won't be taking questions throughout the presentation, but if you have an issue now, please place it in the chat, and that way we can respond to you while the presentation is going.
I'll just try and share that again.
Thanks.
That should work.
Susan.
Hmm?
Susan and I had just walked out the front door of my house and we both looked at each other and went, that sound, what's that sound? And it was a swarm coming right over our heads and into that tree. That was an empty tree hive that I had in the front yard. That's me with bees. I've had bees for, I think, 22 years or so. I got my bees right when Varroa struck. So the first year I had them, there wasn't Varroa, and the next year there was. And we've been working for years on, many years on how do we let the bees protect themselves? How do we give them the space to mature and develop and be smart about their environment? And we've been able to do it. I haven't had Varroa for many years now. And we've been through, just so you know, that we're experienced in diseases and things like that. We've had other ones, a deformed wing virus and things like that have come through our apiaries as well. Go to the next slide. Yep, that's still me. That's my first book, Song of Increase. This was a book that was based on personal knowledge and deep intuition. And it's why bees act the way they do. The second book that I wrote with Susan, the next one, is What Bees Want. Beekeeping is Nature Intended. And this was how you put all those principles from Song of Increase into practice. And we've been doing that for many, many years now. Next slide. So Susan and I get asked to speak all over the place. We've been to Europe, we've been to all over North America, and hopefully Australia in person one of these days. We came up with, Susan, do you want to talk for a minute? Tell where we got the 12 tenets of beekeeping.
It's kind of evolved over time, but probably the original, the original that really got us excited was when Tom Seeley started writing about what bees really need, and he came up with this wonderful paper called like Darwinian Beekeeping, and he had these various tenets about what would work and why that would work. And Jacqueline and I were like over the top because we had been kind of intuiting these things like, yeah, I think we should start doing this, or these hives aren't working, or what do you? So it's like we were so excited to know that by watching, observing, and just listening to our bees, we were getting a strong sense of what worked and what didn't. And now suddenly there was like science behind it, and Tom Seeley, no less. So that was a very exciting time.
Next slide. So this is the first tenet of it, is keeping bees in small hives. Susan, go ahead. I'll catch you halfway.
Sure. Um, we have never had really monster hives, and bees in smaller hives don't have to produce nearly as much. Bees in smaller hives is pretty much how they live in trees when there's nobody bothering them. They don't have large colonies. And a smaller colony means the bees use so much less honey to get through a winter. And it means that if something crashes, it's not a massive hive going down. It's a small enterprise. And sometimes they can even start repairing the damage themselves when they're in a small group and they're not dealing with boxes stacked on top of boxes and boxes. And it keeps the Varroa at safe levels because the more bee boxes you have, the more mites that you can have. And a whole lot more time in these small hives really is spent on making honey, grooming themselves, caring for the babies really, really well. And what we had learned from Torben Schiffer, who's one of our favorite bee researchers in Europe and got so much data that it's mind-boggling. He discovered that the minute you put an empty box on top of a hive, bees stop doing all of the necessary housekeeping things that they need to do. Furthermore, he went on to discover that as soon as you put the box on, the mite drop stops. The bees stop chewing up the mites and throwing them off. Suddenly, everything goes into foraging and honey production. And he said all of the care mechanisms go out the window. And it will take the bees about 12 million bee hours to fill up that top box. And all of that time is lost to caring for the young, self-grooming, teaching themselves other Varroa techniques. So we like to keep bees in smaller hives.
Next slide. Roughing up the inner walls. Well, you can see this sticky, tacky stuff on in the photograph there. It's propolis. And we put it on rough sawn lumber, so it's not smooth on the sides. The more propolis you have, the better health the bees have. And this is something a lot of conventional beekeepers try to get rid of propolis because it's a bother. It gets stuck, it holds things together, it's inconvenient, it's in the way. It's all that stuff for people, for the bees, it's necessary. Without propolis, they have to work harder to defend against pathogens. The combination of material of oils and products that go into making propolis are specific for that particular area. Susan and I lived about a half an hour apart. As the crow flies, I could practically see her house 10 miles away. I'm exaggerating, but it's 10 miles away. And I had one color, my propolis is bright red, almost like this color here, but even a little bit brighter and redder. And Susan's is this beautiful olive green. But that's what her bees need over in her area. And that's what my bees need in my area. So it's a specific combination of prescription, in fact, of what the bees need to keep the health inside of that hive. Next slide. This is the coolest thing. This is a little group, a small hive, a wild swarm that I caught and put in one of my beehives. When it started getting into the fall and the weather started to change a little, I noticed that this particular hive had built these little tunnels. This is the front entrance. So in the original summertime, this whole front entrance was open all the way from the right side to the left side. When it started to get cold, they took care of the management of heat production by making it, they had 3 little holes, just one bee size big, and bees could go in and out of that. It also allowed them to prevent yellow jackets, which are a problem in our area. Yellow jackets go after and eat the honeybees. The coolest thing about this was they would open up the doors to 5 doors, and then it would get a little colder, and they'd close it down to 3 doors. They'd open it up to 4 doors. they use them like as needed. The funniest thing about this was that in the following year, when we had mating flights with some of these drones going out and mating with some of the queens in the other hives around the farm here, they this behavior started showing up. So it was in the memory, the practical memory of these bees by cross mating in the just with the bees around the farm, they passed this particular knowledge along and allowed them to save time and effort and energy and to be really productive with what they wanted to do. It gave them more free time. Susan, you want to say anything about that?
Yeah, I really wanted to make another mention about propolis. It's bees don't have an interior immune system. So the propolis is their exterior system. And the way that they use it is by coating their hives with it or putting splotches of it on the entryway, which is what they tend to do with my skeps. There's a lot of propolis in the entryway. So the bees are constantly walking through this stuff. And they've discovered now also that that activity that we call washerboarding with the bees, where suddenly everybody looks like they're little in a little conga group up and back and up and back, that the inside of the hive, that behavior actually has to do with refreshing the propolis, keeping it clean, um, rubbing it, rolling it so that it stays fresh. And the propolis has a really strong scent, and that scent, inhaling it, helps the bees keep immune. Walking on it, having it all over the hive, as you all know, all of the cells are coated with it over time. So the bee babies grow inside propolis. So, and in conventional keeping, frequently bees are bred to be really, really low propolis producers, which is, I guess, a boon for beekeepers, but good Lord. I mean, that's telling the bees to throw out their whole medicine cabinet. Carry on.
Next. Oh, Susan, do this one. I like your explanation of this.
Do I have a good explanation of this? Okay,
You do.
what I actually, we learned about the notion of ecoflores from Phil Chandler and thought, well, this is an interesting thing. And so if you set a bottom beneath a hive and let the bees have access to this space, not to build in, but to have the access. And you fill a nice portion of it with, take clippings from the yard or like old leaves and things and little twigs, and I throw that in. And that enables the bees to live with the community. And according to Michael Bush, who's really researched this work, who also is treatment free, but with, standard hives, he said that when bees are left to their own devices and have this kind of space, bees are used to living with up to 8,000 different organisms, and spores and creatures within a hive. So it really is a village. And when we took that away from them, we wiped out the village. And in the bottom, under my skeps, I'll go in there if a hive perishes and check out what's in the bottom. And I found ant nests, and of course, wax moths are down there all over the place. Pill bugs, springtails, love it down there. Earwigs, love it down there. And I've never seen any of those creatures be a problem for the hive at all. They stay down below. And you can bet that any mite that falls down into that mess is not going to walk back up because there's somebody down there who would like to make him dinner. So we started using these eco floors, and they've just, I think that they've really improved our beekeeping a great deal.
I have. I know when I've collected wild swarms from trees, I've had the opportunity to look down in the bottom of what what falls away, whatever is not useful in making the hive and holding the propolis and the honey and the pollen falls away to the bottom. And it is this deep thing. I took a hive out of a very old hive that had been, oh gosh, probably 40 years old, maybe longer, from the side of a one-room schoolhouse. And the underneath the hive was about 5 feet long, so almost as tall as me in the side of the building. And underneath it was equally as long. It was that much of the twigs and bark and soil and everything that they had, mostly it was broken comb that had dried up and fallen away. And it had just filled that entire area all the way up to 5 feet deep. And there was quite an active bug population in there, all kinds of bugs in there. Next one. Does everyone know what's in a pollen substitute? Pollen substitute, the ingredients include oils and sweeteners and things that bees don't normally eat. And they're pollen substitutes. And generally in my area, typically we have the beginning of bee season is in March. And pollen substitutes, people start giving to their bees about a month and a half earlier to encourage them to get to business quickly. First of all, pollen substitutes don't have the proper food in them. Bees are meant to eat honey and pollen and to work with propolis. That's it. There's a really short diet menu chart. But when they are fed something that's foreign to their bodies, there's a payoff on that. There's a drawback. And it gets them out of cycle. So these bees that are being fed and stimulated in February are coming out early, and they're starting. The queen is getting ready to lay. The first flush of blooms in the flowers. And yet what happens is then suddenly the bees are ready. They've got their first generation coming out, and they come out and they're out of sync with the season. The blossoms haven't happened yet, but the pollen substitute gives them the information that the springtime is in full force and ready to go. So I would encourage you not to use pollen substitutes and let bees want to eat. Anything you want to add to that, Susan?
Yeah, I agree totally with what the slide says, as the substitutes kind of create a poor quality worker. And where we live, the bee season starts early, but we can suddenly have like a sudden spell of bad weather and snow. And if you're feeding your bees and pumping them up to get out there and forage, and suddenly the weather does not accommodate, you can wind up with a lot of dead bees because they're not going out, they're not able to forage. There's a mass of bees inside the hive. Who knows how much honey that they have left for the winter and what they're going to be doing. I did notice a question in the chat because I'm kind of looking at the chat. And going back to the echo floor, we just cut a hole in whatever boards that we have on top of the echo floor. And sometime I've made them as wide around as my skeps, and now they're about like this. And I always usually have an access door into the echo floor as well, where bees can come and go. So some bees will build all the way down into that floor, and some bees will kind of stop at the floor level, but they all have access to that space. And you can make it as big or, reasonable sized as you'd like. And the bees love it.
Next one. We space our hives apart. We've got them tucked in here and there and everywhere. I did originally have a bee house where I had all my bees in one place, but that makes it really easy for bees to transfer varroa mites for one thing, as well as other diseases and pests. I do have bees. I had two hives were on this ledge, and I had one that went out to the east and one that went out to the west. So the doors were facing in different directions, so there was less cross mingling.
I
Um,
have three skeps right now, and we also have a bear that wanders through our property. So I had to, for the first time, I usually had different stands, and I had all the skeps in different parts of the yard, and now I've had to put them all together in this like bee house area that I have. Maybe it's like 8 feet long, and so I've got three skeps standing there. And so what I did was, like Jacqueline said, you can like aim the door in different directions. So I've got one group that goes out one way, one group goes out the other way, and one group comes right out the middle. And I have the luxury of sitting and really watching my bees and looking to see, are they crossing that line? And it's like they've almost put up like an invisible shield that they keep. I don't see bees coming out in mass moving around together at all. They really separate themselves as they need to. I basically couldn't afford three different hot wire bear fences, so we have all the hives surrounded by electric bear fencing that we put on at night. And so this is the first time probably in mostly all my beekeeping when the hives have been really close. So it's kind of interesting watching how they make their own separation of space.
that's interesting. Next slide. Oh, Susan, you do this one. I like it.
This is, I mean, we've all of us have been reading, and I know in the natural and regenerative beekeeping um, site on Facebook, there's like a new whole article about how the varroa mite has finally become immune to basically the only really decent chemical that they had to try to kill them. So over time, what we've done as the mites have become immune from one pesticide after another, um, is we've produced marvelously strong mites that can withstand just about anything. So essentially, what we did have in the past were weak mites and strong mites. Now, if you're busy treating, what you've got is darn strong mites all the time. And those mites can do a far more sinister number on your bees than would have ever happened if you just left everything to be. So, Seeley's research on feral bees proves this. And what Seeley said, which we just thought was fascinating, is within the 30-year span uh, that went between the years that he studied feral bees in his Arnott forest. He said that, of course, Varroa kind of wiped out the forest bees, and he didn't really expect to find a whole lot of them when he went really back into the forest like 20, 30 years later. He had all of the chemical components and slides from all of the bees that he had gathered uh, pre-Varroa. And he went back into the forest and found that the numbers were exactly what they had been when they all died out years before. The feral colonies had come back equally strong. And when he went into the hive, and he took some of those bees and he collected data from them, he discovered that in 30 years, those bees had more than 600 DNA changes in only 30 years. And
I
I
find that
speculate that he only went back in 30 years. How long did it take those 600 changes to really come on? It might have been a lot faster. And he said that the bees that now live in that forest actually even look different than the pre-Varroa bees. So I thought that was fascinating. Natural selection. We think that we've got a handle on natural, that we can do better. because we have thumbs and fingers and all that. So we can intercede and we can do better. Nobody does better than natural selection. It can be brutal, but nobody does better than natural selection.
When we were in the midst of battling with Varroa, I remember consciously making a decision that I was going to trust my bees and figure and see what they figure out as a solution. Now, I got to tell you, I lost quite a number of hives because they were weak and were unable to build resistance against the Varroa. I lost bees to other viruses and things like that too. But I kept looking at it like from a bigger perspective. The bees that were resisting, that were developing resistance, were the ones who were going to be the ones who were the saviors for the other bees. The bees who were weak enough, they were sacrificing themselves to give the other bees a resistance, the capability to build resistance. I keep coming back to the same thing. You have to trust your bees. You have to trust your bees. For many years in a row, it pained me. I would cry to see hives that I loved dying because of this, because of the varroa and the viruses that come with it. But eventually it did turn around. It took a few years. We let them do what they wanted to do. I considered my job is to give them the best homes that I can possibly find, which is some of the things that are in this class that we're doing, and to give them the healthiest forage that I could do. So I became more of a gardener than a beekeeper. That was my priority. Give them good food, give them good homes, and see what happens. And it turned out to be pretty good. So that's what we've been teaching for as many years as the Varroa has been around now. And I know you're all in the midst of dealing with this. You can do it. You can do it. And the bees can get stronger. There's more steps in this presentation that we'll talk about that'll help them get stronger.
I
Next
have
one.
a real interesting comment on the no chemicals thing and getting through Varroa because when I started with bees, I was having the same sort of things. I was, you know, I never saw Varroa on any bee that came out of the hive, but I knew that they were in there because there was mite frass in the combs, and I saw a lot of deformed wing virus. And they would make it through 1 year, but then by the second year they were failing. Jacqueline has lived on 10 acres of farmland. I was doing most of my beekeeping in in a neighborhood backyard that was, just a little neighborhood backyard size for bees. Now, but my hives were so popular. And Jacqueline's hives, with her log hives and the setups that she had created for the bees, that was like prime real estate. And even in my yard with just my few skeps, the swarms that got away and lived and made it, they came back. They came back in following years to check out if I had any open real estate. And suddenly we were no longer having to go gather the swarms. Sometime in the spring, somebody would fly in and take that hive over. So over time, what we had is a bee community in our area that we were repopulating with swarms who would go out, strengthen themselves and somehow they a lot of them weren't captured, so they went off and hopefully found healthy hives of their own, but they came back. I don't think Jacqueline ever has a hive stay empty for very long. And I stopped having it happen too. It was, I would say, maybe 7 years in, 6 or 7 years in, was when I started noticing, I just wait a while and they show up. So, that's another piece of it that when you're with the bees and you're working with certain groups of bees and you're allowing swarming, pretty much you start to create this whole what they call bean, as the bean, which in German means the entire Umwelt of the hive, which is like the two areas around it. Well, probably in our 2 hour area or our 2 mile area, we were we were creating so many new healthy bees with the swarms because we weren't treating. We were allowing the hives that were going to fail, and suddenly we stepped into natural selection, and the bees started to thrive. And then I just quit seeing Varroa. And so it wasn't just a matter of, you know, don't treat and make them a nice hive. It's encourage your bees to swarm because you're now creating a new kind of a bee. And when I go and see friends that have hives that are, in the very conventional boxes, um, I say to myself, those bees are not like my bees. And they're not. I mean, Jacqueline and I hardly ever have to wear any gear. The bees are very calm. We don't meddle with them very much. We allow them to do what they do. And so our bees are just different from a heavily managed colony.
Quite different. Next slide. This is a lovely box from a Warri hive that you can see how thick the wood is. 3/4 inch. In America, they usually build 3/4 inch of wood for the frame for the whole hive versus the 4 inches that we have. This all came about because for me, one day I probably had had these, just a few years, maybe 4 or 5 years. One day I got a call from someone who had just cut down a large tree that was leaning over his driveway. And when the tree hit the ground, it broke off the top part, and that's where there was a hive that was in there. Now, this was just at the beginning of winter. And I went and collected the hive. I got a chainsaw from the person who cut it down. And we cut about a 7-foot section off of it. That's taller than me, a foot taller than me. And brought them home and set them up. So I just had a piece of a tree that was a little taller than me set up. And I was thinking, gosh, what am I going to do? They have no food. With the place where the tree broke was where their honey stores were reserved. So it was just the bees in a tree trunk. So I decided that even though it was the dead of winter, coming into winter, every week I would go and feed them some honey. So see if you can imagine this. The tree is about 7 feet tall. My husband cut the top of it flat off so it was smooth. And we put a piece of plexiglass up there so that I could climb up the ladder to the top of the hive, take the piece of plexiglass off, and then feed them a chunk of honey in comb. Every time I'd go up there to do that, no matter how warm or cold it was, the bees were awake. Now, I had had bees for a number of years already, and I had seen them go into torpor through the winter quite a bit. If it was cold weather out, and we get cold snaps, the bees were sleeping. They were in torpor. The almost asleep, but not quite. And then what we did was, I remember I'd take the piece of plexiglass away, and I'd stick the comb down in there, and they'd all run up and start to eat it. It was really friendly. It was like they got to know who I was. Like, oh, here comes the woman with the honeycomb. And we did this all winter. They never were asleep. No matter how cold it was, they were always awake. And then it started just dawning on me that the difference in their beehive and my beehives that I was having my bees be in was the difference in insulation. They were capable because the tree trunk that was around them was like this thick. It was as thick as my hand. They were able to keep the temperature at a proper amount so that they were warm and remember a few slides back, we said they socialize in the winter. They clean each other. They clean the hive. They have all kinds of little tasks while they're inside. So my point is, I learned from that hive, and we started going down and looking at all of our hives and redoing every single hive we had, allowing them to become thicker insulation, which allowed the bees to do the thermal regulation. It was a significant difference. Up until then, I lost hives every winter. After I took on doing year-round insulation, so it was able to keep it cooler when it was in the hot weather and hot enough when it was in the cool weather. Once we did that, I didn't lose bees through the winter anymore. All my hives survived. I'd get to March and I'd do a head count and go, everybody's here. And that was amazing to me. I didn't realize until then that it was that important a task to have insulation be this thick. Next slide.
No, no, wait. Um, I went to a couple of classes with Mikhail Teely, who's just a remarkable beekeeper and now is just completely working with wild hives in trees within his watershed, and they're doing all kinds of studies and things. And I remember Mikhail telling us back then in that class, he said the bees need to be living in something so that the outside temperature only very slowly affects the inside temperature. You know, ideally, the bees need to keep a constant. He said, when you have a thin-walled hive and poor insulation, it gets hot, it gets cold, it gets hot, it gets cold. What does that mean for the bees? Bees are working constantly. They have to fan, they have to work. They either have to warm things up or they have to cool things down. Well, how do they do that? They do that with honey energy. And he said, in really well insulated hives, bees will use 5 to 10 times less honey because they're not constantly having to do fanners and cooling and channeling air. That is the biggest honey eater in the hive, is trying to keep the temperature safe for the young. And so a log hive, 2, 3 inches thick, they're wonderful. You can find sections of logs all over the place and make one for yourself. And I did skeps. And a guy who was a weaver told me that 2 inches of like woven thick straw is the equivalent of almost 6 inches of wood, insulation wise. So during the winters and during hot summers, but I've never seen my bees cluster since I started with the skeps. It just stopped. And Mikhail said, he said, clustering is an abnormal behavior. In their evolutionary history, bees did not have to do that, but they do it now out of desperation. And the whole time they're clustered, man, they're going through the honey. But when they're up and moving, they don't. They don't have to do all of the activities to keep the temperature the way that they need it. So there.
And what you were saying about the temperature going up, going down, going up, going down, that's how you get condensation. And
Yeah,
condensation is to mold, and mold is deadly to bees, totally
yeah.
deadly to. Next slide. This next slide is one of my hives, the top bar that was out in the field. One day I went out after snow to see how my bees were doing. I looked at this one and went, oh my God, what a mistake I've made. Can you guess where the bees are? And what a waste of energy that is. It's just they're making energy inside to try and keep it warm, and it's coming right out the top of the hive. So we fixed that. We insulated. We put we made a piece that was the same size as the top but thicker and insulated it. And that prevented those bees from having to waste their effort. Next slide. This is a comb that came out of one of my hives that was on the side of the hill down where the apple trees are. And this is something I did that was incredibly stupid. So let me share it with you. I went down in the early spring and I looked at this hive and I opened it up. I know for the given how long I'd been beekeeping, I know I was opening it up way too early. But I looked inside and I went, oh, look at this. They've done this wrong. They've made mistakes. They did wonky comb. So I did what any stupid beekeeper would do. I took it out and I put a regular bar in there so that they could build some comb. Within a week, they left. They left. It was still cold weather. They had nowhere to go. They had no stores to build up. It was a death warrant for them. I'm ashamed to know that I did that, but I did. Anyway, I had this comb that I had taken out of the hive and said, "What in the world are the bees doing? Why are they building wonky comb?" And I sat there next to that beehive for about a week. I kept going over and sitting next to it, going, what is it that they were trying to do? The front part is the part that's closest to you. What they were doing was building this hillside, had a breeze of wind that came up from the bottom of the hillside up to the top. And along the way, a big wave of water would go, a wave of wind would go right into the hive. So that what they did was they were building a wind diversion. And you can see when the wind went in the front of the hive, the part close to you, it slid around and it was exiting right back out again. So they had come up with a brilliant solution to keep the cold wind out of their hive. And I stupidly thought I could do better as a human. I've learned since then to trust my bees. Anyway, Susan, you want to add anything to this?
I'd actually like to add something that that's come up in the chat, and what both Jacqueline and I haven't addressed yet is, and what the question is, okay, if you're keeping them in logs and skeps and unusual situations, how do you harvest honey? Jacqueline and I don't harvest honey. Basically, we harvest if a hive perishes, then we'll go in, and if there's excess honey, that's when we take honey. I will tell you that there are people though who are using skeps and who are using logs and have add-on features where they can actually collect honey. But if your main intention with bees is honey production, none of this is going to suit you. If this is honey for your family and some friends, this is fine. But this kind of beekeeping is not going to become popular with commercial beekeepers. However, commercial beekeepers can at least do super insulation. Let the bees make propolis. Keep the top thickly covered so there's no condensation raining down on the bees. All of those things can serve to keep bees healthier.
Next slide. Hands off. Well, Susan, you want to do this one? And I'm
I
joking
mean,
about
I am
this.
such a believer in this. Bees bees are creatures of place. They are not creatures that just decide to pack off in a whim and go across the country and fertilize blueberry fields. They are creatures of place, and they know that place. And because my bees and all the swarms that escaped knew that place, they knew every nook and cranny about where the forage was good, where there were possible places to live. That's why they would come back to my place to bring swarms in and keep my hives populated, because I was not moving them to different pastures and different places. Migratory beekeeping is absolutely hideous. Over here in the States, that's what moved Varroa from one end of the country to the other in just like a season. And we also find that the more that you poke your fingers around inside of your hive, the worse that your hive is really going to be doing. The less inspections you do, the more work that they could get done. Mikhail Thiele also was one of the first to say that when you go inside of a hive, it will take the bees 2 to 4 days to correct what you've done. It will take that long to get the temperature flowing again, to fix whatever you may have messed up with the comb, to add some propolis to some stuff that you might have broken. Every time you go in, you break the propolis seal so that the sterile air inside the beehive uh, goes away, and they have to start setting that all over again. Now, if you're somebody that goes into your hives every 10 days, all through the summer, through the bee months, how much time do you think your bees have lost? They've lost weeks just trying to repair um, our fumbling fingers and what we do by letting out the hive air and trying to get it all back in shape so where they can have healthy young and where it's the best temperature to be crafting honey. So we don't rearrange it. We don't mess with the bars. We do nothing in brood chambers. We just flat do not go in until our hives perish. And then we go in, and between what we've seen on the outside of the hive that we've learned, and then what we now see on the inside of the hive that is gone, we can pretty much tell why those bees are no longer there, why they perished. Was it a queen thing? You know, which is usually what it is in some of my skeps because like they end up swarming like 4 or 5 times a season. So making and creating new queens all the time and getting everybody reestablished can, sometimes I'll lose the mother hive, but then I've gained 2 or 3 daughter hives that stay and live with me. So we just would say, please, the bees know the timing and the tasks. And the more you can keep your curious fingers out, the better off. And yeah, yes, question isn't the requirement that needs to be able, yes, hives need to be able to be inspected. As we said, we're not doing this commercially. In probably most states in the US, they don't have enough hive inspectors to come around. And they sure don't go into backyard hives, and they're not looking for what we do with our 4 or 8 hives or 2 or 3. So, so if that were to be the case, we have talked about this and said, our hives aren't managed hives. We've got we've got a hive creation and bees either move in or don't. We're not we're not managing these hives at all. This is like, bees flew into my eaves and I left them there. Are you going to call that a managed hive? No, these are not managed hives. And so that's in some way that we all are talking about this in the natural bee community. How do you get by that you have to do inspections? But what I would say is the first thing you need to find out is, are there inspectors in your area and are they coming out regularly? And in a skep, you can inspect the comb. It's going to be tricky, but you can inspect the comb if an inspector gets busy. In a log, well, you're out of luck, but the bees just flew in. It's a log. Leave it alone.
This is probably the hardest of all the slides that we have in this presentation. This is the hardest one to have people believe. Hands off is really important. It doesn't mean you don't pay attention to them. As a matter of fact, I frequently know what's going on in the hive because I spend a lot of time doing observation. I can open the hive up and know and look at it and go, yep, that's what's happening. Or I can look outside from the outside inside. If there's pollen coming in, this brood happening. If there's depending on the activity, what it looks like. And I'm talking about paying attention to everything, like the sound, the smell, the scent, the activity level. Is it high? Is it low? I had one time when I was going into a hive and I was going to just check. This is the thing I used to tell myself all the time. It can't cause any harm. I'm just going to check. I'll be in and out of there in 5 minutes. They seemed a little active, but I didn't pay much attention because I'm bullishly going in there as a person who knows more than bees. And I say that so sarcastically. So I opened up the hive and I just went to move one of the combs back a little bit. And it was so warm that the wax broke, and I ended up dropping a whole comb down into the bottom of the hive. I made a mess that it's going to take 10,000 bee hours to fix. I made a little, I set the comb up. It was in a top bar hive, one of these that's in the picture, I remember. I set the comb up as well as I could in the same spot. It was in the middle of the hive. Then I closed it all up and went out. Then I reviewed everything that had happened. And, those bees had told me, don't come in today. There's stuff going on in here. It was too hot. I was in danger of doing exactly what happened. And they had tried to tell me by being they were just a little cranky that day. So what happened was, after I got over my embarrassment and my shame for tearing up the inside of their hive, um, I closed up the hive and didn't go in there again for months. Anyway, one time I was in the hive, probably 5 months later, and I had put a little X and made a design to tell me that this was the comb that had broken. And when I went in, I opened up the hive and I thought they would have taken the comb apart or something. What they did was the comb had been leaning against another comb after I broke it, and I straightened it up as much as I could. What the bees did was they took the top of the comb, which was no longer attached, and they rebuilt the comb in the top of the hive, making it re-adhere to the original comb that I dropped. Then they went down on the bottom and they chewed away the bottom of it now that it was able to be held up. Look at how brilliant that is as a solution. Human one goes in and makes a mess of it, and then the bees come out and do this engineering and design process and fixed it so that it was like I had never been in there. I only knew that that had happened because I had made a mark on that comb, on that bar, to tell me to check it next time I was in there. Brilliant bees. Anyway, hands off
Wow.
as much as possible. You want to say something, Susan?
Yeah, Jacqueline always also has she will always talk about if you're going to have bees, you need to become a member of the 1,000 Hours Club. You need
Oh,
to sit outside of your hive and just watch for 1,000 hours. And this spring, I've been thinking of you a lot, Jacqueline. I got like 4 or 5 swarms. I had 3 hives, 3 skips to fill. So I'm just watching everybody. Um, the first swarm. I'm watching them, and I realize in about a week, week and a half, they don't have a queen. I can just tell by watching them. It's like they're kind of muddling around at the front door. There's no pollen going in. The bees aren't like well directed, like zoom, 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 zoom. There's not this active going in and coming out. They're just muddled. And oh my gosh, they don't have a queen. So the next swarm that I got was actually inside of a pipe. I mean, it was like 5 feet thick of bees down into this pipe. And I had to get them out of there. I scooped a bunch with my hands. And then I gave up and I used a bee vac on the rest. And I'm thinking, oh man, these poor bees. Well, what I do have to offer them is in that skep that there was no queen. I had decided just to look at it one day, like what had they done with no queen? And they made 3 or 4 nice, completely empty combs. So I got home with this bunch of bees from the pipe, and I thought, I'm gonna introduce them to this queenless hive, and maybe they will get along well, and I'm going to sit here and just really listen. So I popped the edge of the skep up, I put up a board, I poured the pipe bees onto this board, kind of aimed them with my hands toward the little opening of the skep, and they started wandering in, and I just listened. I just sat there and listened and watched. And the bees go in. There's no hassle, there's no fighting, there's no arguing. The sound of the hive stays. "Hmm." So they moved right in. So I watched that hive, and I have now determined that they do have a queen. So I know the pollen's coming in, they're doing this directed activity. So those bees that were failing with no queen, can be part of this enterprise now. Um, Another
That's a
swarm I got was massive, and I'm watching them now, and it's been about a week, and they obviously had a queen. We had to cut them out of a wall that was like a icky removal. And, when you're taking them out of a wall, you don't know if you've got the queen or not. And we also had to vacuum in that case. And it was like, oh my gosh. So I got them at home. They're in a large skep and they're all just milling. And what I'm hoping for is that maybe the queen was just injured. And if that's the case, um, perhaps they can make some wax and get her to lay some eggs. They can construct a new queen. So I'm just going to keep watching. The last swarm came in gonzo. They were bringing in pollen. Second, third day, they're the doo, 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 doo. They are on it. So just by watching, I've been able to kind of determine, like Jacqueline says, it's the smell of them, it's the sound of them, it's the activity level, and not just are they active, but how are they active? Are they directive or just wandering around the bottom of the hive? So that 1,000 hours, ugh, it's critical and it's a joy. And when you do that, no one can tell you are a bee haver. Oh, you're just bee havers. You don't know anything about bees. No, when you sit and do careful observation and kind of apply it to the science that you know is out there, no one can say that you're a bee haver. You know, you're a bee tender. I'm done.
next slide.
Let's,
Grow local. Do you have, Julie, can I ask you, do you have a lot of bee breeders in Australia? It's a huge industry here in America. Can someone answer that for me?
Yes, we do have bee breeders here in Australia. They're right across the whole country. They have some of them are big concerns, some of them are smaller. They predominantly produce usually Italians of some sort.
We encourage people to get local bees, and that's what catching swarms is about. And they understand the seasons in the forage. And we have bee breeders who live in the southwest part of the country and the southeast part of the country. I live in the northwest part of the country. If I order bees, what I'm going to get is bees who understand how to live in hot, dry environments, whereas I live in a damp, cool environment. So you're importing bees who lack the local knowledge. They don't know when the flowers bloom. So that's really a big mistake in my part of thinking that imported bees, you really don't want them. There's no reason why you can't breed your own bees naturally. The inseminated queens are that you get, the ones that are already bred. Those are bred from an assembly line of bees, this one kind. And one of the things that happens when you have local bees is that the bees, the queen, as she's laying her eggs, has many, many different daddies in those in the brood that she's laying. And each of them have access to the history, the local knowledge that's the history of the area. When you have an inseminated queen, it's a narrow set of genes that you're breeding. And it doesn't have, remember that a few slides back, I had that front door with the holes in it that the bees built. That's an example of a local bee, local breed line that knows how to handle temperature changes by making the holes in the front doors and covering it over. That's something you don't get with inseminated queens because that's too specific a local area for them to have access to that knowledge. The local queens also live longer. I know a lot of people are taught in bee school that you have to kill the queen every year and replace her with a new queen. But the reason you're doing that is because when I asked someone that the first time, I remember I was in a bee school, and I said we were being taught how to kill the queen and replace her with a new queen, which was something that I found horrifying. I didn't know I was signing up to take part in killing queens. The reason I believe that this goes on is because it's believed that the queens, the purchased queens, the bred queens that you're buying in a package don't continue their fertility into the second and third years. So it's taught in bee schools, and I'm sure some of you have been to the bee schools where you learn how to do this, that at the end of the first year, you find the queen, you kill her, and you place her with a new queen. Why? Because she lacks fertility. The reason she lacks fertility, so this is where you get over into our side of the woods. The reason she lacks her fertility is because the bees are not allowed to swarm. I believe that the reason that the fertility is lacking is when that queen goes out for her swarm flight in springtime, she gets a burst of sunlight on her body that stimulates her hormones and allows her to become fertile for another year. The inseminated queens never get that chance. Does that make sense? So we rely heavily on swarms, and we set out bait hives for the swarms that are local and ferals. And we trust that the bees are learning to deal with diseases and pests on their own. The imported bees, I know in our area, we don't have, what is that, hive beetle? We don't have hive beetle in our area, but I know someone who, in my area, who ordered an inseminated queen, and it came and there were little beetles in the box with her. So she was smart enough to do away with them, but that's how the importing happens. We just have a habit of sharing swarms with friends. When we have an extra swarm, we call around and say, "Do you have an empty hive? Would you like a feral hive? Would you like one of my hives?" Susan, you want to add anything?
No, that's absolutely perfect. Local bees all the way.
Okay, next. Go ahead. Susan, go ahead.
Tom Seeley says that in a healthy hive, like, during the summer months, you can expect like 15% of the comb is going to be drone comb. And my personal experience with drones and is that when the first ones that hatch out are just not well. And I wonder if they are the ones who've been sacrificed to Varroa because they come out, they can't really fly, they'll end up on the ground. And, as they begin to hatch out, then finally I'll see them starting to like take off and do what it is that drones do. And most people would say that drones do absolutely nothing but go out there and, work at finding virgin queens. Um, we have now learned that when drones come out, a lot of them leave the parent hive and they will go and live with other hives farther out. And the reason for that is that if something happens with the weather and the timing and the queens in that further area are not really able to like get to drone congregation areas, the drones that have moved in from other hives can mate with them within the apiary. So they'll fly off. And your hive may have lots of drones in it that did not come from your hive. And drones, of course, can go in and out of any hive. Nobody minds the drones. So they have a lot of special uses. They have their large, big bodies, which can like help warm things. I don't know if they do, if they're fanning at all. I've never seen it. But Jacqueline has a story about the drones kind of containing the history of the hives. And when they go into other hives, they have a way of sharing their history. And we, of course, have absolutely no idea how bees communicate and what all they communicate. But I'm convinced that they communicate. Um, I'll just put it out there. I think they communicate on some kind of a cosmic level. So we have no idea the kind of information that they share. Um, Tom Seeley once said, when we were at the first bee conference, when we got to meet him, somebody asked him, with all the bee studying that we've done, how much can we safely say that we finally figured out about honeybees? How much have we learned? And he said, maybe 4%, maybe. So, I tell myself, I know maybe way less than 4% because I don't read everything and I don't remember everything. So who am I to be butting in and deciding who's going to live and die in this hive? Why would I ever remove drone cum? They just build it right back.
They see value in in the drones. Up until the day when they ask them to leave, they treat them with respect. So they have to have some function in there that we're unaware of. And then on the day when it's time for them to leave, they exit. They take them out. Sometimes they can be really a little pushy about it, but up until the day they ask them to leave, they're treated well and respected. So I think that's worth noting that they don't the worker bees don't see them as valueless. Next slide. Yes, bees are arboreal. They live up in the trees and they cannot deal with ground dampness, which is funny because most of us who came in from the conventional side, the first year I was conventional, although I didn't put any chemicals in my bees, but I was using conventional materials for homes. They were down on the ground, and the ground has dampness that comes up into the hive. My sense is that bees need to be at least 3 feet off the ground. That's waist high for the bottom of it. And protect them from the sun, protect them from the rain, protect them from snow. That's a picture of my bee house on the lower right, one of my bee houses. And you can see I've got many different kinds, tree trunk hives, warre hives, top bars, all different kinds. And this is a freedom hive up in the top left. We had a friend of ours who lives in England. Next slide. Ah, yes, swarming. Susan, you wear those bees in a lovely way. Bees want to swarm, so why in the world would we want to prevent it? This, and what I want to mention is that the colony makes all the decisions for swarming as far as I'm concerned. I don't know enough to decide these things for them. People think that they do, if they do a split, that that's a swarm, but that's not true. The split is still decided by us in which bees go and when they go. And that's not the same. The other thing is, as I mentioned just a little while back, the queen needs to be exposed to the sun, and a split doesn't allow that function of a swarm. A swarm takes the queen out with them. And swarming, you get a brood break. It kills off mites. When the bees leave, they leave and they prevent the bees from. Susan, pick up where I'm at.
When you have a swarm, like the brood break can be incredible. So since the Varroa can only live in the brood cells, the longer the brood break you have, actually, the better. So, if it's a secondary swarm, the virgin queen goes out. She has to get mated. That's at least like, a good week in the hive that's left behind. They're usually, they've got a queen at that point. But I have found in certain swarms, even if it's a mother swarm with, the queen that's left the colony, or if it's daughter swarms where it's, virgin queens going out. And Mikhail and I were talking about this. He has seen the bees in that new swarm that the queen has decided that she's not going to lay for a while. So the longer that she waits, the bigger the brood break. And he said he has observed hives where the queen doesn't start laying for like 5 to 6 weeks. I mean, she's got it all inside of her. She's done her queen run, but she's just going to delay laying. And I mean, think of what a break that is. Where do the Varroa go? They're like gone. So
That's
that's
the you can decide that you when you give the queen in the hive itself the ability to make all these decisions, they know that there's a reason that she needs to not lay eggs for 6 weeks. We don't know what that is, but she knows
right.
that there is. And some of they're predictive on stuff. Sometimes they know weather ahead of me. So it might be something, a drought is coming or something. Whatever it is, there's some reason why, and we have to again go back to trusting our bees. Teaching the public. Susan, you did a really cool thing with setting up that library hive. Tell them about that. That's wonderful.
We were so lucky. We formed a little nonprofit for a while that kind of fell apart during COVID, but we taught free bee classes like once a month at our public library. And the library, people that worked there would try to sit in on the classes when they could, and they were very excited about that. We were doing bee classes there, and the library decided that they wanted their own hive at the library. And so we had our friend Barry create a mock log hive. It's a big square enclosure like a box, and inside of it is a round tube, goes down in, it's wooden, and the sides are completely stuff packed with straw. So it's super well insulated. And there's a large insulated cap of wood, and then more box and more straw. And we got that hive ready, and we brought it up and put it in a tree. So we climbed up the crotches of this great big, I think it's a maple tree, and got the hive up there, got it on with like uh, uh, car straps, those ratchet straps. And then it's like, okay, we're gonna need to get bees in here. And not long afterward, I got a call to come downtown into the town, and that there was a swarm dangling 20 feet up in a tree right in the middle of the biggest intersection in our small town. So I get there, the fire department comes. They can't get up there because their ladders have to lean against something, and these guys are just on a very thin branch. And the city manager happened to be there, and I had a real good relationship with him. And I said, "Do you have a boom truck available?" "Well, my gosh, yes, we do have one out now." I said, "Can you get them over here?" So the boom truck comes by. They can go like way high, like a big cherry picker thing. And then and then the guy in the boom truck says, "Okay, who's going to go up?" And the police say, "I'm not going up." And the firemen say, "I'm not going up." And I say, "I'm a bee professional. I'm going up." And by gosh, they suited me all up with all the gear and the hard hats. And I went up there and I gathered that swarm. which I later learned was from a feral hive just a few buildings down that was living inside of a brick wall. And I got the swarm in a box, got lowered down from the boom truck, walked to the library with this swarm in a box, put it into the library hive, and that hive survived treatment free. Nobody went near it except to go out and go, this is cool, for 7 years. It was the 7 year downtown in the middle of a, small little urban area, and they did beautifully. And the hive is actually still there. They lost the bees finally this last winter, and my friend Duncan Mason got one of the swarms from my old neighborhood, which were actually all relatives of that library hive. And so he put the next swarm in, and I hear that bees are doing really, really well. And man, they've all been teaching moments. That library hive has swarmed up to 4 times each season, sometimes just once. Let's see, sometimes I think they've always swarmed at least twice. So I was always down there gathering the swarms, and people would come by and ask questions, and they'd be so excited. And if it was a really calm hive or calm swarm, like on one of the rose bushes, I'd say, here, put your hand under this and just feel them. They're as warm as little kittens. And it's like people's whole lives would be transformed around bees just by being in the presence of those swarms. So I think swarming is not bad news for your neighborhood. Swarms are the best teaching moments that you can possibly have.
The people we've between the two of us, we've collected hundreds of swarms. And
Yeah.
that's one of the things I like best about it is taking someone who's afraid the bees are going to attack and sting and turning their mind around, having them come up and be close to the bees, notice what the bees are doing, that they're calm, they're focused, they're doing their own activity, they're not interested in stinging, and it makes everyone happy. I mean,
Hmm.
even these people who've never been around bees before, they develop this elation during the time that we're teaching them about bees, and that just warms my heart.
I actually, within the last few weeks, one of the swarms that I gathered, I went to this lovely couple's house. They were like in their late 60s, probably early, probably around like my age. And I brought a skep, and I was just going to let the bees just go right down into the skep rather than put them in a carry box and redo them. So I'm carrying this empty skep, and the bees all walk in because they're all very happy to walk into a skep that's got little bits of comb and everything in the bottom. And I'm up on a ladder, like, about 5 rungs up, and I have to lower these bees down so I can get off the ladder. So my husband's holding the ladder. So I said to the woman's husband, "Would you hold this up for me?" And he said, "Okay." And he comes forward and he holds him up, and I climb down and I lower it and I say, "Look." And he looks in and he's, "Oh my gosh, I can't, I, I don't know what to say." So I take the bees home. A few weeks later, I run into him at a farmer's market, and he said, "My whole life changed the night that you came to get the bees." He said, he said it was like I'm thinking stinging insects. Oh my God. And like you're up there in like a tank top and flip-flops, and you were so calm and calm and happy that all of us just got calm and happy. And he said, and and I'm holding the skep full of thousands of bees, and I'm so calm and relaxed, and the bees are humming." And he said, "I tell everybody I meet about that story. I can't stop thinking about it. Just being that close to them, like," he said, "my whole worldview's changed." I mean, how cool is that? How cool is that? That's what bees do. So,
I think that's our task too, because we're celebrating the life of the bees, and we're doing it in such a way that we can share that with other people. I think that's just miraculous. It's wonderful. And it teaches people that we don't have to be afraid. Maybe there's other things in the world we don't have to be afraid of.
Yeah. Yeah.
Next slide. Next. Go ahead,
Okay.
Susan.
The bees, Tom Seeley told us that although they really have no idea how this mechanism works, the queen bee in a hive, when she is directed to lay queen eggs, that she can select. I don't, this is less amazing to me. Of all the eggs that are floating around in her system, that she's, she can either lay a drone, or she can lay a worker, or she can lay a queen. Seeley called the eggs that she reserves for queens to be the royal cast. So she will lay the royal cast, and those are going to be the best bees for the hive. Now, when we queen rear, we just take any, under 3 day old uh, little egg that we can find, and they start from there. But they're not at all getting like the best of the best. So somehow the queen in the hive is able to distribute out for those queen cells the absolute best, best bees to be turned into queens, which I think is just absolutely fascinating.
Yep, bees know more than people know.
Yeah, well, that we know, yes.
Is there one more slide? Oh, this is a video. Want to play the video?
Yeah.
This is that very first photograph that we showed of Susan standing in front of these hives. We walked out in my kitchen and went, oh, this tree that I had set up that had bees in it at one time, I brought over and set up in my front yard, and look, they came and populated it. So this is us collecting a swarm. Because this is how it realistically is most of the time. The swarm comes and finds their own home, and I'm providing forage and home for them. And they find it and they move in. It's a nice arrangement.
Yeah. Well, thank you, folks. Goodness sakes. Do we have time for a question and answer?
Yes, we certainly will.
There's
And
one more there was one more last slide there that had we have a newsletter that you can sign up for on it. It's at spiritbee.com, spiritbee.com. And Susan has a website too.
Let's see if we,
well,
so my
Julia's just
website is my name, susanchernak.com. And I've got a large blog there about when I first came into skep beekeeping and how I learned it, and so there's that whole thread on it too. So yes.
lovely. Julia's bringing that slide up now, and we'll leave that on the screen so that people can take note of that. Okay. All right. So, thank you, everybody. Um, Now we'll organize to go through the questions quickly. And I noticed that in the chat we've got lots and lots of comments, but not a great deal of questions. However, we will go through some of the things that have been raised, if that's okay. And the people who've made comments will have the opportunity to or to actually have asked sort of questions, will have the opportunity to ask their question if they would like to. I noticed that Bruce, you've got your hand raised, and we'll certainly get to you in a few moments. And if anybody else who hasn't put something in the chat who would like to raise their hand, you can also do that. And I'm just going to start at the very beginning of the chat, and we will go through the things that are in there. So, Bill and Bradley, you actually um, mentioned a really good concept and sort of a question. So, did you want to ask your question? And you can now take yourself off mute if you would like and ask your own question, or I can ask it so that everyone can hear it. I'll just give you a few moments to access that if you would like to.
Hi, yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
So I had to scroll back up to see what it was. The cavity in the or the small cavity bees produce a higher quality honey. Is that the one you're referring to? That's
It
the
is. Yes.
that is definitely a theory because I can taste the difference in wild honey. So if I take a hive of bees from a tree or from the side of a house, living in a wall, their honey is amazing. When as soon as I put them into a Langstroth hive in my backyard, they do not produce the same type of honey. And it's never the same, even if it's in the same, general location that they forage from. It's just not the same as when they're in that small cavity. So it's an observation. I don't know if anybody else has noticed that too.
Well,
So, Susan or Jacqueline, have you noticed that?
Honeys are site specific. It depends on what flowers are blooming at that particular season and how good they are. So everyone is going to be different, although if you've got a big field with the one kind of monoculture growing, then you could actually say it's peppermint honey or something like that. And most of the honeys we used to do a honey test tasting when Susan and I were doing talks around locally, and we had about 40 or 50 different kinds of honeys. And you might want to just pick up little jars of honey when you travel as a souvenir, but you can taste them when you taste them together next to other honeys. They're remarkably different.
I would also guess that in a small cavity, then what you're talking about is my guess would be that the bees have probably been able to like propolize heavily, and they've probably been able to set up their comb the way that works the best for them. So they would be much more natural and really, really healthy bees. As soon as you put them into a Langstroth, um, they can't maintain temperature hardly, even if you put them in a really well insulated box. Because if they're on a frame, the frames have airspace, top and bottom. In a small cavity, they attach at the top, they attach all the way down to the side. So essentially, each comb is a completely different room, and they can close off entire rooms heat or cool them. Or I've even read that some of those combs might be for like a quarantine bees that aren't feeling quite as well will go hang out in the infirmary. But basically, when they can build all the way down and attach, each each comb is its own room. So they can't do that in Langstroth. The air is always moving around them. They can't contain it anywhere, which is really, really hard on them. And when bees are stressed, I mean, I would guess that stressed bees um, don't create as vibrant a honey. It would just make absolute sense. And our friend Torben would say that in a Langstroth hive, there's no way for bees to exist that they're not heavily stressed. So they're heavily stressed out in their environment these days, and then they come home to their hive, and there's stressors in the hive that make it very difficult for them to function. So, I the way that our group, our library group and our bee group worked with old Langstroths is we had a fellow who would build a round insert, and he would make essentially a smaller version of what we did with the library hive. He, you can take a couple of deeps and put this round insert, pack it all full of, all full of straw or sawdust or something insulating, and then make sure that you've got a like a good solid top, and don't put bars in it. But again, if you want to keep honey, you know, there are different ways to do this, but all of them will be hard on the bees. You have to know that in mostly any situation where you're taking honey, that it's going to be hard on the bees. And I need to check out just for a second and go grab my plug-in, or else my computer's going to turn off. See you in a second.
Okay. All right. So, Natalie has shared a web link there, and you'll be getting this chat list as well. So you can have a little look at that when we finish the webinar, because we are close to time, and I want to make sure that we have the opportunity to speak to Jacqueline and Susan about anything that's a specific question. Bruce, I noticed that you're coming up now about pollen substitutes, and you've got your hand raised. If you would like to take yourself off mute and ask your question now, that is fine.
Okay, so I worked for a feed company, and we did make a pollen substitute. So I kind of know what went into it. There's not more than just the plant proteins, but there's a number of other things that went into it. But yeah, it's all not really pollen. It's all plant pieces that have been ground real fine. So it's not really good food for them. I agree. I don't use them, and um never will, I guess. My
Thank you for
question is,
thank you for sharing that. I never talked to somebody who actually made them. Wonderful. Did you have
um,
that?
the question that I have is will this recorded presentation be available to show to bee clubs at all?
Okay with us.
I'd love it.
There we are. Yes.
Okay.
And we'll be sharing it with all of the attendees. So you'll be able to access the video after the event. That will happen in a couple of days' time.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
You're welcome. Now, Joy, you also mentioned that you make your own patties. Did you want to share anything else there? You're welcome to take yourself off mute and quickly do that. Otherwise, I'll move on. Okay. Natalie's shared some stuff there about virology. That's almost a whole webinar in its own right. Thank you for sharing it, Natalie, but we won't have time to talk about that today. I'm sorry, because we are running out of time. And Bill shared another link, and so has Natalie. So again, you'll get the the chat, so you'll be able to look at those yourself. Joy does ask a question about the harvesting honey in skeps and hollow logs. I'd just like to get Susan and Jacqueline to very quickly talk about if people do want to harvest honey out of those, is there any sensible way of doing that?
Not out of a hollow tree. Got a number of hollow tree hives, and you can't get them out of that. Skeps you can, but remember there's going to be damage. We really stick to we're quite aligned in the fact that we don't harvest honey from live hives. And we do lose hives eventually. You know, I find the typical hive that they live in it, they populate it for 5, 6, or 7 years. And I've correlated that with different beekeepers around the world. That seems to be a natural time for a brood break in a tree hive. or a skep or a warray or a top bar if you leave them alone long enough. The if the hive has failed at say year 6 or something, I'll tip it upside down and harvest some honey. Yes, and that's where my reserves of honey come from.
Thank you.
Okay,
Um,
I have a couple of different ideas also.
Good.
When Torben Schiffer made his Schiffer tree, which is like a mockwat log, he had a section on top about that big, that you could actually essentially take like a piece of wire and run it through, kind of like you've seen in Japanese hives. The stack boxes, and they will put a wire through to take the top honey store off of. And with the skep, I actually have a skep that has an opening the size of a large mason jar cap, and I can actually put a mason jar up there when the hive is really, really busy, and it's a really good active strong hive, and I can put a nice heavy sock over the glass jar, and I can end up getting a whole little jar of like comb honey when the bees decide to start building up there. And that's kind of like a small way of doing it. Skeps in the past, what they used to do when they were just for home use is you could like tip the skep up, and you could actually just break some sections of comb off. So that's the kind of doable way. And there's a guy online by the name of Chris Parks, and he actually is creating a skep honey producing little apiary, and
Hmm.
he would have information on his site how to do it. So I would just Google Chris Parks. He's a rather amazing guy. Um, or if you do log beekeeping, if you segment a small piece of log, that if the hive is, really going strong, you can take this little section off, same thing, wire, and then just empty it. And I would say, though, that you wouldn't want to put it back on because then it's hollow. And then the bees have this hollow place that they have to fill. So putting anything on top is not really wild. So like on the skeps, I wouldn't do more than a little mason jar. But it it is possible, but not if you're trying to make honey to sell. Not even
thank
make honey, take honey to sell.
thank you. I'd like to just go back to one point that was made by Earthways a little bit earlier, and we did touch on it briefly, which was about how do you connect your eco floor box to your existing hive, no matter what that hive is, whether it be a top bar or a skep or whatever it may be. How do you connect that so that the bees can and the different organisms can interact effectively?
Any, okay, with a log hive, you would just throw stuff in the bottom before you ever put the bees in it, and then they would have that, and they would be working on that. With my hives, and with some of Jacqueline's, we frequently use an old Langstroth box, and essentially seal it, but in the top area have some kind of a cutout. So whatever hive that we're using, if it's a skep or even like a false log construction, that there's a hole. There's a piece of wood that that your actual hive body stands on, and then below it is, and it's on wood, and then below it is this box, and and there's a hole cut out in it, and like mine for the skeps are about like that, so the bees come and go.
Okay, thank you for that. There's also been some comments about another book called The Observant Beekeeper, and several of the participants on today's webinar have said that they feel that it's a good book. I don't know what your thoughts are, Susan and Jacqueline, on that, and if you're familiar with that publication.
I
I'm
haven't
not.
read it. Sounds good. I should get it.
Someone telling me about it too, so it sounds like it's right up our alley, huh, Susan?
Yeah.
Excellent. Okay. Um, and some people have said that they'd like to connect up. And thank you for sharing stuff. And I'm just going down to the end of the chat now. Just making sure we haven't missed anything that actually was a question. And then there's,
Bill, thank you for posting that about you showing how to make one of the hives like the kind we're talking about. Thank you for that.
yeah. And then there's also a mention there of the Natural Beekeeping Summit, which will be on in August of this year here in Australia. And and quite a few of our participants also mentioned about insulation and how it reduces a lot of humidity, which both of our presenters also talked about. So, I'd like to encourage everybody to consider making sure that their hives, whatever type of hive it is, that it's very well insulated because it's going to benefit the bees. Okay, so Rebecca has a question down at our time stamp of 11:44 a.m., which is quite far down the bottom of our chat. And Rebecca's actually added in an image, and she says, "Is this sort of long lang presented as a bee hut okay?" So, Rebecca, did you want to ask your question?
I see the picture.
Rebecca, if you're on, please take yourself off mute and feel free to ask your own question. Otherwise,
Yeah, you there? Yeah.
yes,
So
thank you, Rebecca.
I'm seeing a lot of these bee huts popping up, and the way to do it is the long lang. And what I'm gathering is this not a good way to beekeep, or is a different hive a better method for these huts? Or
If there's frames in the langs, frames are really impossibly hard on bees. Bees bees can't function to their optimal dealing with frames. What they can use is you could have like bars across the top, kind of essentially like a top bar, and just let them build on bars on the top so they can construct the wax along the side and make their little individual rooms like that.
okay, and having it off the ground
Yay.
is better for the moisture, or
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah. Bees having evolved in trees and high up are they are not suited to ground type molds. They've never had to deal with them. And so anything close to the ground where those areas have that hive has a chance to incorporate molds in it is going to be hard on the bees. And that's another reason that we talk about having like round inserts, because any engineer knows that the hardest places to heat and cool are corners. So when you've got square hives and things that are put together with corners, and if you look in spring and look closely, what you'll see is those will be the corners will be where mold is or it's been wet. I mean, you will just see it in those corners. The bees had a very hard time with it. And if mold starts growing The spores are really bad for the bees, and the bees inhale and it goes into their guts, and eventually it just kills them. So we try to keep them away from mold as much as possible, which is super insulated, heavy insulation on top, so we're not getting condensation. And also, if the bees can propolis the entire interior, you're not going to get mold on that propolis in that kind of an environment, and that's really healthy for the bees too.
Okay, so having a top bar, and what about that particular shape of like is it like a trum?
Okay, here we go. The difficulty, if I had a top bar hive now, and I actually had a friend of mine buy one, and she said, "How can I redo this so it's bee friendly?" And I said, "Set it up on end," because uh, the bees that we have traditionally grown in vertical space. And I guess in really warm climates, there are beekeepers like, Les Crowder and things that make horizontal hives work, but the difficulty with horizontal hives is that for the bees to eat, they have to move through the hive during the winter. And if it's really, really cold, the whole group of bees is going to have to get around and into the next honey stores. And there are way too many cases of people reporting that their bees essentially froze to death making that curve to get to the honey. And what you also consider is the top of a vertical hive is a very warm nest space. And the air in it is actually sterile. I mean, it's a very special place for bees. Um, in anything that's horizontal, the whole back part of the hive, if the bees are clustering or they're in their winter mode, there's all this cold space that isn't being addressed at all. Um, with something vertical, the bees can be going up top, the cooler that it gets because that's the most insulated part, and that's where like all the honey stores are, and the honey is insulating. So bees have a very hard time with the temperature um, in these kind of horizontal type hives. But Jacqueline and I have never tried to beekeep in the Southwest or something like that. That might be more suited to those kinds of hives. Personally, we have never found those to work very well in the Pacific Northwest, especially. So
Okay.
Thank
vertical,
you.
if you can get vertical, do it.
I
Thank you.
wanted we didn't cover in the class that I think is important. One of the things one time I was up in my bee house in February, and I had just spent the day before working with an elderly friend. My husband and I went and we helped him cut a quarter mile of grapevines. We did the pruning on them, and my hand was so sore. My wrist was so, I don't know how many times I pressed the clippers, but I was hurting. And I was up there and I saw a little bee come out. And I was thinking, well, this is a bee coming out to do a cleansing flight. She's going to fly off 10 feet and poop and come back in. And she, instead of going up and doing that, she turned around and she came over to where I was standing next to the hive. And I had my hand on the table there. And she walked up to my hand and she sat down. She turned and faced me and she squatted down, and I was going, wow, what is she doing? And then she stung me. She stung me. And I thought, well, that wasn't very nice. And then I noticed that this was the part on my hand where I had been doing the clippers the day before, where it was really sore. And that's where she stung me. And within a minute, all of the pain went away. One of the reasons I like this story so much is because it tells you that you can have an extraordinary relationship with bees. Individual bees are one and all of they're one part of the whole. So when I'm interacting with one bee, I'm interacting with the whole bee and the whole beehive. I marvel at that story because she read me so well and she knew how to bring me comfort. And I think that's the kind of relationship I want to encourage people to have with bees, that we see them for the magic little beings that they are, and they see us as people, as beings who want to help and have the wisdom to do the right thing, which is mostly hands off, but give them provide the elements that help make their lives enjoyable. So
That's very true. Thank you so much for sharing that. I think we've probably got time just for one or two more questions. Bill and Bradley, you also asked a question about insulation. Did you want to just ask that quickly?
Yeah, it comes up a lot in our beekeeper meetings where the it's fall's coming around, autumn, and you've got to put insulation on for winter. And the debate is, do we put insulation on and take it off in the spring, or do we just leave it on there all year long?
all year long. Because
so that
during the summer months, if what you've got is temperature changes happening, you know, in the morning, in the afternoon, at night, and it's fluctuating, it's going to be really detrimental to the bees. You leave it on all the time, and the bees are these brilliant HVAC little critters, and then they know what they've got and how to handle it. Stuff that comes on and off is just not in the bees' evolution. Boxes on and off, insulation on and off, lids on and off. That doesn't happen. So all of those things just create more stress on a creature that's that's being massively stressed now from all different directions. So yeah, you leave it on during the summer months too.
they want stability. They want to know that they can trust their surroundings. So yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. So I'd like to thank everybody who did make posts in the chat. And obviously we'll be sharing that with everyone. And your chat posts were valuable. So thank you so much for doing that. In closure today, because we've reached that time, I'd just like to thank Susan and Jacqueline and all of our participants today. That was absolutely fascinating, and I certainly learnt a lot about the method, this method of managing bees. And I will be becoming a member of the 1,000 Hours Club to sit and watch my bees. And we hope that you may be able to come to Australia in person one day. We look forward to meeting up with all of our participants again at another webinar in the future. You can check when any of our scheduled events are going to be held by joining Be Natural Beekeepers Varroa Warriors Facebook page and accessing our events tab. I would just like to say that the recording and the chat will be sent out to registered attendees in a few days, and we are about to close this webinar. So if you have any other comments that you want to post, please do so now. Otherwise, we will be. Yes, Jacqueline?
I think you can buy the two books that we have out. I think they're on Amazon in Australia.
Yes, they are. They are available through Amazon. So if anyone's interested in purchasing those books, they're quite fascinating and go into a lot more detail than what we covered today. So please consider that if it's something that you would like to do.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you all.
Is there anything else that our presenters would like to say today?
Thank you all for taking their time. Lord knows what times you're all on. So we really appreciate it. I mean, it's just been wonderful to be able to share this stuff with people that are interested and uh, can ask can ask good questions rather than just attack, right? So we feel like we're within kin, so we thank you very much.
Thank you. Jacqueline, did you have anything else you'd like to say?
I'm always so happy to be in the company of people who love bees and have such respect for nature and be willing to really take it to the wall to make that happen. I thank you
Mhm.
very much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. And now Asha also mentioned in a post whether there was some way of learning how to do skep making. Julia and I have considered possibly seeing if we can run a webinar on that with a learned skep maker of some sort. So we stay tuned is what I'm saying, Asha. There may be something coming up in the future on how to make your own skep. So
Actually, I will tell you on my website, susanchernak.com, on just look for the keyword skep, and I actually have written down instructions that are actually really good that show how to make it from the very start. And if you just follow that, you're you're in. And I'm happy to take any questions. So like if you start a process like that and go, well, what do I do when I get here? Blah, 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 blah. Um, e email me, just contact me on the site and, I'll get back to you. And I'm happy to talk about it.
oh, that's lovely. Thank you, Susan.
Oh,
We may look at doing a skep making workshop with you online, maybe. Who
all
knows?
righty then. All righty then.
So that would be good. Um, so I will now just say thank you again to everybody, but we will be closing off this webinar and we will meet again soon. Keep your bees safe and love them. Thank you.
Bye.
That was fun.